I want to begin by asking you a question this morning. If you were to take a guess of how many Christian denominations and branches there are in the world, right? And that includes all of them, Orthodox, Catholics, the Pentecostals, the Baptists. If you were to take a guess, how many do you think there are? Okay, any guesses? Have a guess. 52. That's lowballing. That's lowballing. Who said 100,000? 200,000 or 200? I mean, it depends, I guess, which AI you look this up on. But the estimates by some researchers, there could be around 45,000 Christian denominations around the world. 45,000. All claiming the same Lord, right? Claiming the same cross, the same empty tomb. We've all read from the same book, and yet somehow many have come away convinced that everyone else has got it slightly wrong. Or maybe not even slightly wrong, flat out wrong, right? Where Christians are calling each other out, even calling each other heretics. Back in the 1800s in Russia, there was a well-known bishop in the Orthodox Church. His name was Theophan the Recluse. And by all accounts, he was a serious, godly man, in his own church, considered a saint. But now he got word one time that one of his own people, just a simple believer in his congregation, had started sitting under the teaching of a traveling English preacher who just turned up into the city, an evangelical, simply preaching Jesus and teaching the Bible. And so Theophan writes this man a letter to try and stop him from being led astray by this evangelical. And so let me read you a portion from that letter. He wrote, "The truth of God, the whole pure and saving truth, is to be found neither in the Roman Catholics, nor in the Protestants, nor in the Anglicans, but only in the Orthodox Church. Christ is here, in our Orthodox Church, and he is not in any other church. So do not search for him elsewhere, you will not find him." Now, those are some fighting words, aren't they? That's very us against them kind of language, isn't it? I mean, if an evangelical preacher like him is labeled a heretic, what does that make of all of us, right? Who are simply trying to preach Jesus and teach the Bible. Here's one thing we all know for certain, though. Here's something I think we can all agree on. It's that our enemy, our great enemy, full disclosure, we believe in a being called Satan. He loves to divide, doesn't he? And one of his favorite targets has always been the unity amongst believers, the unity of the church. Because he knows he can't stop the gospel from going out. And so it's almost like he's happy to settle for second best. And that's to get God's people fighting against each other instead. And so when we hear quotes from these well-known bishops, it's almost like we get the sense that the enemy doesn't have much work to do at all, right? When the church are the ones willing to do the dividing for him. But this morning, I don't want us to hear all of that and assume that's just how it's supposed to be. And that's just how it's going to be. Because it wasn't always like this. There was a time right at the very beginning, before the labels, before the denominations, before there was an us and them, there was a time when the church could be summed up with 5 simple words. 5 simple words, and they were of one heart and soul. And so this morning we need to go all the way back. Back before the splits, back before there was a Protestant church, back before there was a Catholic, back before there was even an Orthodox church. And we need to go back all the way to when the church was literally only weeks old. back to when the church was behaving in ways and treating each other in ways that a watching world simply could not explain. And that's going to be our simple task for this morning. What does it mean? What does it look like to be a simple group of believers who are of one heart and soul? And we're just going to look at two things this morning. Two things our enemy hates more than anything, because they're the very two things he's been trying to tear down ever since the church was born. And it's these: radical unity and radical generosity. We're going to see that a church that is of one heart and of one soul is a church that is not only radically united, but that unity is going to be expressed in how generous we are with one another. So let's start with the first one, radical unity. Look at verse 32 again. We're told that the full number of those who believed, that's just talking about the church. Remember, there's thousands coming to faith. They were of one heart and of one soul. What do you think when you hear those words, heart and soul? I mean, many of us, we think of feelings, don't we? When we think of the heart. And then when we think of the soul, it's almost like we picture that little bit, that religious part inside of us that's going to go off to heaven one day. But that's not how those words are being used here. Because in the world that Luke, the author, is writing in, your heart, hear this, your heart was where the thinking took place. Your heart is where you weighed things up. It's where you made up your mind. It's where you set the direction for your entire life. And then your soul, that was the whole of you. Everything you wanted in life, everything you love, everything that makes you, you. And so that little phrase there, that's not talking about, having warm, fuzzy feelings about the people you go to church with on a Sunday. No, to be of one heart and soul goes far deeper than that. That's talking about taking your deepest convictions, the whole direction your life is heading in, and that now converging into one shared life and purpose with the ones you're doing church with. It's almost like talking about a marriage, isn't it? Think about a marriage, right? When a man and a woman come together, bringing everything they are and everything they have, and it becomes one. One shared life, one shared purpose, right? Where your desires and your goals and your vision for life, even your finances, they begin to converge, they begin to align. That's what's being described here. Now, for some of you, you might be like, well, I don't know, that kind of unity, that's only reserved for a spouse. Or maybe with family. You might think that, I don't know, at least here's what I can tell you. What we're being told here, though, that first community of believers, that's the kind of unity they were experiencing. And you know what else is really interesting about that phrase? By using those two words, heart and soul, Luke, the author, it's like he's reaching back into some of the oldest words in all of the Bible. Words that most of those in that room would have either known or prayed since they were a young child. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. And so very simply, what you have then, you have a whole community saying, let's do that. But let's do that together. We're going to put all of our hearts and all of our souls together, everything we are, everything we have, into that one shared goal and purpose. To love the Lord our God as one unified body of believers. And here's what I love about this. And why I don't think this is some unreachable dream for us here at Allawa. Because that first church that we're describing there probably looked very similar to this church. People who did not all look the same. People who did not all sound the same. People whose paths probably would never have crossed otherwise. Because you had some rough fishermen from up in the Galilee region sitting next to some very polished, educated Greek speakers from the big smoke, from the cities. You had the wealthy sitting next to the very poor. You had masters sitting next to their servants. You had people who only months earlier would never have crossed paths. They probably would have crossed the road to avoid each other. But now those same people are basically inseparable. And now they're sharing everything together. And the only way to make sense of this kind of radical unity amongst such radically different people, the only way to make sense of it is grace, right? And great grace was upon them all. It's only God's grace that can take a room full of strangers who share nothing in common, but then as they turn to Jesus, well then one by one he adopts them and they become family. Family. And here's why I would go as far as to call them family, because notice how they start treating each other. The way you'd only really treat your own flesh and blood, right? Look at verse 32. And no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. I don't know about your house. I know in my house, my wife and my kids, they know that everything I own, everything I have, everything I've accumulated over my lifetime, it's theirs. No questions asked. And that's how most of us were raised, right? Our parents shared what was theirs with us without a second thought, because that's just what family does. But how about someone in our church family? Someone we share Jesus with. Someone we'd say we are of one heart and soul with. I wonder if when push really came to shove, and a brother or sister walked in here today with nowhere to stay tonight, or they couldn't scrape together enough for this month's rent. Someone from church lost their job, but the bills don't stop coming. Maybe a single mum who joins our community who doesn't have their own actual family support network, but they're desperately longing for one. I wonder if when push comes to shove, would you open up your home? Would you open up your wallet? The way you would in a heartbeat if it were actually one of your own. You see, this kind of love, this kind of unity, it can't be fabricated. It can't be forced. You can't be manipulated into it, because it's only a work of grace. So here's what I'd like you to do. Since I think most of us here would say that you have been a recipient of grace, right? Here's what I'd like you to do. In the most uncomfortable and awkward way possible, turn your head and do this. Look at the person next to you, or maybe the person in front of you, or maybe the person across from you. Anyone who isn't your blood relation, actually related to, okay? I want you to look at them and in the most awkward way, lock eyes with them right in this moment. And then as you look at that person, I want you to ask this question. If they were in need, that person, if they were in need, what would I do? Would I actually do everything in my power and within my resources to respond? Or would I hesitate? See, the way you answer that, the way your heart is answering that right now, shows whether you actually believe that you are of one heart and of one soul with that person you just locked eyes with. See, that first church, they didn't hesitate. They weren't left wondering. Being of one heart and one soul was never just a great time of fellowship with my brothers and sisters after church. It was much deeper than that. You know what it was for them? It was a key to my house. It was access to my bank account. It was everything I owned up for grabs to a brother and a sister who was in need. Because they actually believed it. They actually believed that the person sitting next to them, the one they hadn't even met a year ago, was now closer than family. Because now they're both part of God's family. That's what radical unity looked like from the very beginning, at least. And now for the second one. And the second one just kind of builds on this first one. Radical unity leads to a radical kind of generosity. Look at verse 32 again. And I'm just going to read that chunk. See, the full number of those who believed were of one heart and one soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own. They had everything in common. And with great power, the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet. And it was distributed to each as any had need. Let me ask you to be real honest again. How does it make you feel when you read verses like that? When you read things like, no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own. Things like they had everything in common. Things like there was not a needy person among them. Because if you're anything like me, when you read that, something inside of you kind of tightens up, doesn't it? Because we can talk about almost anything in church, but the moment you start talking about money, man, people get touchy. People get defensive. Maybe even they start to tune out. Maybe it's a little more sinister than that because you've had a bad experience with this kind of thing. Because you know what? Prosperity preachers, I don't know if you've come from a church like that, but prosperity, they love preaching about passages like this one. And they'll take a passage like this one and they might say something like, see how much grace was upon them all? They received so much grace because they sold everything and gave it to the church. See how much grace was upon them all? And here's the thing, you can build a whole empire by manipulating people this way. In fact, one of my favorites, a guy, and he's such a fitting name, Creflo Dollar, remember him? Back in 2015, he asked his donors to chip in $300 each towards his $65 million Gulfstream private jet. I love that. Because in the words of Kenneth Copeland, remember him, maybe the most well-known of the prosperity preachers, quote, you can't expect me to do ministry by getting in a long tube with a bunch of demons, right? Can you? In other words, you don't expect me to fly in economy class with all those demons, right? Of course I need a private jet. Maybe it's not about the jets. Maybe it's about speaking about the Lord's return that can manipulate people this way. Back in the 1840s, there was a Baptist preacher by the name of William Miller, and he was convinced from his own study of the Bible, he'd worked out the date for Jesus' return. And so he and his followers, they landed on October the 22nd, 1844. And so word spread fast. Thousands believed it. Farmers stopped planting. People sold their land, closed their businesses, gave everything they owned away. Because why hold on to any of it if the Lord was coming in just a matter of weeks? And so they gathered and they waited. But obviously, October 22nd came and it went and nothing happened. And that day was called the Great Disappointment, and it was. Thousands who'd given away everything, left with nothing, ruined and bitter, and many walked away from the faith for good. And so, yes, passages like this can be misused, and they can make us deeply uncomfortable. But at the same time, they can't just be ignored, right? They can't just be ignored. Because they show us our DNA as a church. They show us in real time what it looks like when a church becomes radically united in one heart and in one soul. And so what did it look like for those first believers? Well, we're told it was a community that had everything in common. It was a community where there was not a needy person among them. It was a community that as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds to the apostles. They brought it to the church. In other words, it was a community that looked at everything they had. Do that right now. Take stock of everything you have owned and accumulated over your long life and said, none of it is my own anymore. And so again, I wonder how your heart reacts to all of that. Is that too radical for you? It's too extreme. I mean, I love you, but not that much. I see you as family, not that much. But now here's the thing, and please hear this. Here is where we need to be very careful, okay? It's with the application. Because the application for that first church to sell their lands and homes and give money to the church, that was very specific to them, okay? Because of what they were going through in that moment, what they were experiencing. Just for a moment, to try to put ourselves in their shoes for a moment, what they were experiencing. Imagine this happened here right now today. Imagine this morning, 5,000 people walked through those doors. Every one of them wanting to genuinely follow Jesus. Every one of them wanting to belong and join our family. 5,000 people, where would you even start? Right? Every single one of them with such different needs, coming from literally every walk of life imaginable. You'd have some walking in who have multiple investment properties in their portfolio. Walking in alongside some who have nowhere to sleep tonight. You'd have business owners walking in with inflated bank accounts, walking in alongside people who can't even hold a steady job and who are most likely drowning in debt. But then all of a sudden, every last one of them, by God's grace, becomes family. And so now you have my family needing a job. You've got my family needing where to live, needing to put food on their table, needing help with their kids. And remember, this was a day where there was no Centrelink. There's no Anglicare. There's no Salvation Army. And so therefore, without anyone else out there to look after them, well then the solution that those first Christians came to, I'm going to sell my lands. I'm going to sell my fields. I'm going to sell my home if I need to, so that not one of them is in any need. That's wild to think about. It's wild. Because I can only speak for me. You know what the instinct of my greedy heart is? Living in our time with all the help, maybe this is the instinct of your heart. My first thought is, well, if they're really in need, there's plenty of free help available for them out there. Instead of my first thought being, if this were one of my own kids coming to me, what would I do then? How would I respond then? But now again, that was the solution for their time and for their moment. But the point, I think, is not really about what they sold or didn't sell or how they did it or how they did. The point was the heart attitude underneath all of it. And their attitude was simply this. It was this. No man gets left behind. No one gets left behind. Not one single person in this family is going to be left in any kind of need. And so coming back to application then, the question we're left with, the question that nobody can answer but you, given your context, your situation, your resources, your ability to step in and help or not. The question is, what's that going to look like for you this morning moving forward? If you truly look across and believe that the person sitting next to you, sitting around you, if you truly believe they are family, what will it look like for you to have everything in common with them? What would it look like to take stock of everything you own this morning and say, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It's all his. Because here's the bottom line. Here's the bottom line. What I think these verses are really getting at. You know, I'm not a business guy, okay? But you know in business when they talk about the bottom line, once you've subtracted all the costs, the wages, the rent, the taxes, all of it, and then you're left with that final number, that number that shows you what the business actually made, that's the bottom line, right? And the reason that final figure, that final number, the reason that matters so much is because that number tells the truth, doesn't it? You can say whatever you like about how well your business did this last year, but the bottom line tells you how it actually did. I reckon that's what this passage is really getting at. Because this morning, you can tell me, you can tell each other how much God really means to you. You can tell me how much grace has moved you. You can tell me how much you love the church family. But the bottom line, once you've subtracted and stripped back all of the religious stuff, the bottom line, the one figure that doesn't lie, is what your heart actually does with your money, right? Because over and over again, all throughout the Bible, money keeps turning up as the one thing that really exposes what we actually worship. I mean, Jesus couldn't say it more plainly than this. He said, you cannot serve both God and money. Do you notice Jesus isn't treating money as just something neutral? Jesus sees money as a rival. He calls it a rival. He calls it a master that's fighting for the throne of your heart. And then he put it like this as well. He said, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. In other words, what we do with our money, that gives us a window straight into your heart, into what we really treasure. And so I don't know what that is for you. No judgment here. But maybe for some, if that's your clothes, shoes, handbags, maybe it's your looks, maybe it's your investment properties and your portfolios. If that's your salvation, if that's your security, if that's where your worth really sits, it's a no-brainer, right? Of course, I will pour money into those things easily and happily without even a second thought, almost as an act of worship. Because that's where your treasure is. But then on the other hand, you know there's a completely different kind of heart as well? It's the heart where letting go of your money, it doesn't feel like losing something. It feels like joy. Almost feels like a blessing. Because it's a heart that actually believes it when Jesus says that it is more blessed to give than to receive. Imagine a heart like that. Imagine a heart like that where giving it away is actually the best part of having it in the first place. Imagine a heart like that. And here's what I reckon a heart like that looks like from up close. It's not the kind of heart that's just going to sit back and wait to be told that there's a need amongst family. It waits for an announcement from up here at the front. It waits for someone to spell it out for you. No, it's the kind of heart that gets close to people, close enough to actually know them, close enough to know what's actually going on with them, to know not only how their week was, how's your bank account doing? How's your financial situation going? So that when a need does turn up, you're the first one to notice. And honestly, there's almost a thrill to it. You can't wait. You go looking for the joy. You go looking for the blessing of being the one who gets to meet that need. In other words, it's not a heart that is asking, how little can I get away with giving? Instead, it's a heart that asks, who can I bless next? Where can I give it away next? And to a heart, let's just say this morning, you want to have a heart like that. You know, Jesus says something remarkable to a heart like that. It's something that actually sounds kind of baffling at first, but it's actually so profound. Jesus says, use worldly wealth to make friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, because it's going to be gone, so that when that it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Think about that for a moment, because at first glance, it sounds like Jesus is saying, use your money to buy friends. Or worse, use your wealth to get into heaven, when in reality, he's saying something so much more meaningful than that. You know what Jesus is saying? Please hear this. He's saying that it is entirely possible that one day you will walk into heaven and someone you have never met in your life will come straight up to you and they will throw their arms around you and say, you don't know me, but years ago you gave and you put a bit of money into that ministry. You put some money into that missionary or into that church, and that's why I'm here. That's what got me here. And so let me ask you, wouldn't you love to invest in something like that? I don't know if you have a financial advisor or one of those things, but imagine sitting across from your financial advisor and saying, I want to invest in something that's still paying out dividend 1 billion years from now. They're going to think you're crazy. They're going to say there's no fund on earth that can even come close to that. But money laid down for the kingdom. Money laid down for the kingdom paired with a heart that says it doesn't belong to me anyway. I'll share all of it. Grace like that, an investment like that, never perishes. An investment like that is still paying out billions of years from now. I just want to end by encouraging you all as a church, because I know that for many of you sitting here this morning, this isn't just theory. It's happening right here amongst us. I've seen it myself. I've watched people quietly cover someone's bills, cover someone's rent, and not just for a few nights, for weeks at a time. I've seen it. I've seen us rally around brothers and sisters who've been sick and stuck in a hospital, unable to work for months, and yet their needs have been taken care of. There have been people where, and this happens more often than you'd think, will walk up to me, press a thick wad of cash into my hand and say, I've heard that so-and-so is moving, that costs money. I've heard that they need a car. I found out that this particular widow could not pay for her husband's funeral. So I just want to bless them. Please don't tell them it was me. So can I just say, I'm blessed to be part of a family like that alongside all of you. And I'm so encouraged that this very thing that we are reading about in the book of Acts, it's alive right here in this room. But now here's the thing. Why are you like this? Why are you all like this? Because none of this ever started with us, did it? Because a radically generous church is simply what happens when you have a radically generous God. Because long before we gave him anything, he gave us everything. And he did not spare his own son. He laid him down for us when we were the ones in desperate need. And so becoming a radically generous church, a radically united church, that always begins and ends and is cultivated and is fostered right here at this table. And so this morning, I want to invite all of you to partake in this bread and in this cup, not because we are worthy, but because God was so radically generous with us in the gospel.